look at this. Nice looking horse. All right, and what'll you give now for that good-looking horse picture? How much? A quarter? Where you been all summer? Didn't you know horses was high up? Oh, say $1. Don't let that horse get away from me. 4.5, can you hear the 5? $5 have you got. And now 6. Hey, 6.5, he says. Now 7. 6.5, can you hear the 7? Try hear the 7. Can you hear that 7? 6.5, and sold. The gentleman over there. Gentleman over there. You'll see him in the races this fall. All right, now we've got...
Edna and John have decided to give up their house and move into a flat.
A lot of them in there.
The house is too much trouble now. Also too expensive. They've lived here 40 years and raised a daughter. Seeing the place empty out isn't easy. Edna keeps busy. John is also a bit restless. He feels unnecessary and is glad when the phone rings.
Hello?
I have a long-distance call for Mr. or Mrs. Cummins.
This is John Cummins.
Go ahead. Dad?
Martha? Hi.
How are you, Dad?
Well, fine. How are you and the kids and all?
Just fine. How's Mother?
She's well. I'll call her. Edna? Edna? Martha's on the phone.
Dad, I just got your letter. I think that's awful.
You mean about the auction?
It's so sudden.
Well, it had to be done. It's too much for us. Besides, Social Security just goes so far.
But what are you going to do?
Well, we found a nice little flat nearby here. Very handy.
Don't you want to come out here, near us somewhere?
No.
I just feel awful.
Now look, Edna, you've got your lives to live. We've got ours.
Can't we do something?
No, we're all set. Now your mother's got all her friends right here. And I can get to the track now and then. It's the way we want it.
Can't we help you somehow?
No, we've thought it all out.
But Dad, you have to be careful of yourself and...
I know all that, Martha, but... Oh, look. One of the auction men wants the chair I'm sitting in.
Is it going on now?
Yeah.
Dad, just to think
Look,
of it.
I'd better hang up now, Martha.
Can I speak to Mother?
Edna? Edna? Martha's on the phone. Edna? Edna? What's the matter?
I don't feel so well.
I'd better call the doctor.
It seems she's had a slight stroke. but the doctor says it's not serious. A slight paralysis is already wearing off. Ten days later, Edna is home in the new flat that they've taken. They're going right ahead with their plans. A week later, she's on her feet. Another week, and she will be doing housework.
Remember how fast this boy was? Well, we put him right up here in our new flat.
Regularly, she takes pills to prevent further blood clots.
There, now. Easy now. Right straight and forward. That's the girl. Good. Fine.
Looks to me like you're doing fine.
Okay, isn't you, Doc?
Certainly
The
is.
girl, Edna.
In part, thanks to him. He put me through my paces.
Well, I was a horse trainer over here at the track for 40 years. Many a day I sat by a sick horse. Shouldn't be able to do as much for my own wife.
That's what he thinks of me. He thinks he's going to enter me in the Preakness now. And I'm not going to win any blue ribbons.
Don't you bet on that. I know a good filly when I see one.
Prognosis: many more years of life. The aging live on the edge of a precipice. Balances of pressure, arteries, blood chemistry are in delicate equilibrium. If the balance is maintained, there can be health and joy. The statistics tell us she may live another 10 or 20 years. Edna is ready for them. But are we ready for Edna? Suddenly, there are millions and millions of Ednas. Are our communities ready? A century ago, we did not need to ask that question. In those days, the ranks of the old were thinned by every illness, every epidemic. A stroke then was a sentence of doom. They would say, lie still, don't move. Soon the muscles atrophied. The processes of life slowed. At best, there'd be a period of living death, then death itself. The old was scarce then. For the few that lived on, there was a place in the farm home. Between the old and the very young, there was often a special bond. But the rural way of life, they knew, was changing. Everywhere, families were on the move, some to the frontier, others to the city. Here, there was less room for the old and less use. The factory assembly line was recruiting the young, not the old. In cramped city quarters, the grandparent was less welcome. More and more, the old were being shunted aside into almshouses. In this way, their needs could more easily be forgotten by the outside world. Most didn't last long, but that too was changing. In medical laboratories, another great transition was in progress. One by one, organisms that had brought countless epidemics were being subdued. Smallpox, typhoid fever, diphtheria. They began to lose their sting. Life expectancy went up. The old lived on in ever-growing numbers. In 1900, in the United States, there were about 3 million people over 65. By 1920, almost 5 million. 1940, 9 million. For the old, was it a boon? In the 1930s, the Great Depression. 10 million unemployed. Among the old, widespread suffering. More and more, they were pushed outside the economy. But 1935 brought a memorable turning point. We accepted at last a national responsibility. A social security insurance plan based on earnings began to provide retirement benefits. Through amendments, almost all workers were covered, and benefits were provided for their dependents and survivors. By 1964, monthly benefits were going to 3 out of 4 people 65 or over. But meanwhile, the old continued to grow in numbers, aided by new medical advances. It was found that enforced bed rest, so long accepted as sound treatment, held its dangers. Instead of lie still, the doctors more often said, get up. Even among victims of stroke, it brought dramatic results, prolonging active life. 1960, 17 million over 65. And so Edna, like millions of others, is on her feet. Active, doing her housework. She and John look forward to the promised golden years. The crisis has even given them a new camaraderie. Fixing the flat is an adventure, recalling old times. As she takes up the tasks of housekeeping, John celebrates the triumph by awarding her a blue ribbon. Now he feels he can safely take a few hours off. Visit his old haunts at the track. See his old friends. Relive old days. Have a look at the horses. There, outside the park, he is hit by an auto. An hour later, the news is told to Edna as carefully as possible. John was killed instantly. A long-distance call is made to notify the daughter. Meanwhile, Edna is taken to a nursing home. Future arrangements are uncertain. The events are a great strain on her. Her body struggles to maintain its delicate balances. Yet statistically, the outlook still is many years of life. What sort of years will they be? Very soon, there'll be 20 million Americans over 65. Millions of them, like Edna, left alone. Are we ready? In 1961, there was an historic White House conference on aging. It was followed by legislation to help communities throughout the nation develop health services for older people. The law was called the Community Health Services and Facilities Act of 1961. By now, many urgent needs were known. Now the emphasis would be on services. In many communities, the Public Health Service began to foster projects showing how needs could be met through existing resources or new ones. Many approaches were used. In some communities, improvement of nursing homes to provide not only the needed beds, but also facilities for recreation, occupational therapy, rehabilitation. For those unable to cook, portable meals served in the home. In another community, special health services in housing projects occupied by the aging. In another community, a clinic for preventive checkups to ensure early treatment. In another, scheduled visits by a podiatrist to senior centers for the all-important care of the feet, the aim. Keep them walking. In another, provision for psychological help to counteract emotional depression. In another community, an information and counseling service. A social worker helps old people and their families to plan for their particular needs. The aim, not just to treat sickness, but maintain well-being. All these varied services have proved valuable and necessary. But though proved, they're still few and far between. Are our communities ready? Most surely they are not. We have learned what is needed. Experiments and demonstrations have shown the way. But relatively few communities in our land are ready. If they were, we know how the story might go. So let us suppose that we were ready for Edna and continue her story. Her daughter Martha arrives. 2 days later, after the funeral, they start the journey to Martha's home. Here, in an urban flat, some readjustments will be necessary. Financially, the family will manage. Martha supplements her husband's earnings with part-time work during the children's school hours. And Edna now receives from Social Security survivor benefits. But Edna, depressed and worn out, takes to her bed. How will she be cared for? A difficult period lies ahead. Gradually, Edna becomes more active. A few weeks later, she begins to cope for herself, but supporting services still come from the hospital. A nurse visits once a day, the doctor once a week. After a time, they feel she's well enough to come by herself to the aging center at the hospital. Edna begins periodic visits, at first hesitantly. She has her blood pressure checked, also her hearing and vision. Such checkups prevent many an accident. At intervals, she receives new pills to prevent blood clots. A checkup precedes each allotment.
So now promenade her 2 by 2 and take a little walk, go home with you and all the way around. Now element left like an element, go right. Now left, and make your star and the gents in the center with a backup star. Now slip the clutch left, all a man and a partner ride with a right and left, grand and a right and a left, go around the ring.
She gets interested in the center's recreation program, first as a spectator, later actively. It becomes a regular part of her week.
Now 2 and 4, move up to the middle and back. Now pass through and a step.
In the occupational therapy room, she acquires new interests. The regular visits to the aging center become important to Edna. For a time, at home, she still has periods of deepest gloom. Sometimes she sits silent for hours, hardly noticing others.
No, says Mom. That would not be fun.
Martha, patiently, keeps involving her mother in household tasks. Edna's activities slowly grow. At the hospital, she discusses her depressions with a psychologist and begins group counseling sessions.
I think that I felt better after I went out on the porch and got a little sunshine on Thursday. Martha set up a little card party for me, and I had an afternoon of fun, perhaps you'd say. But it seems like a very great problem to talk to people.
Well, perhaps by talking some here, we can help you with some of your problems. Mrs. Hardy, how have you been getting along?
Very well.
The months pass, and one day comes an important moment. The hospital referral center recommends Edna for a temporary volunteer job. She helps with a scholarship fundraising drive. She's on duty 2 hours. At first, she fears the responsibility, but in the end feels exhilarated. She feels she's won another blue ribbon. That afternoon, walking home with Martha's younger son, Edna feels a glow of pride. Gradually, she is moving into the life of a community. By 1970, there will be 25 million people over 65 in the United States. Of all people since the dawn of history who have ever reached the age of 65, more than a quarter will be living. Will we be ready? When husband and wife survive together, they're determined in most cases to maintain a small home of their own. When one survives, this may not be practical, though many continue to live alone as long as their health permits. Some find a place with relatives or friends. Sometimes other arrangements are needed. Whatever plan is followed, the old have special health needs. Those over 65 need medical help at least 3 times as often as other people. In any year, at least 1 in 6 is hospitalized. But with the right attention at the right time, many can stay on the side of well-being and joy. We have the knowledge to fulfill the promise, if we will use it. At 65, the average woman now has a life expectancy of at least another 16 years. They can be years of harvest.
I'm going to get this 90 on, this pajamas.
There can still be the special bond